We are going to move on now to Eve Weinbaum, who is the co-president of our faculty librarian union here at UMass Amherst, the Massachusetts Society of Professors. And Eve is going to be talking about our unions, the campus unions proposals related to carbon emissions and climate justice. We'll turn it over to Eve.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here with everyone. David and I first organized together about 30 years ago, not to date ourselves, but it's cool to see that we're sort of still on the same page doing this work. And it's an honor, of course, to be on the panel with Rusty and Rachel as well. I am going to share my screen because I have a lot of information that I wanted to share with you about what the unions have been working on. Oops, you can see my screen now? Okay. So I want to talk about why climate justice is a union issue, how we got involved. I think in some ways the story is similar to the one that David just shared about Rutgers. In some ways we've been ahead of the curve. UMass divested from fossil fuels in 2016, I believe. We were the first major public university to divest, and that was thanks to an incredible group of student activists who had sit-ins and took over buildings and really made that happen. And so we're sort of working on the next wave of activism right now. The UMass Union Coalition is made up of USA, which is classified staff, PSU professional staff, AFSCME, and MSP. And we put together several coalition proposals this year. Sort of for the first time, we took on an ambitious set of issues that we wanted to work on together. So that's been really exciting. The other proposals included joint salary proposals, proposal around expanding childcare, which is another dire need in the Valley, and proposals about holidays and work time in addition to this. Originally we called it the Green New Deal, and now we're calling it climate justice or environmental sustainability, choose your term. And I'll go over the proposals in a minute. It came from many union members who were working on these issues. Some of our members are active in the Carbon Mitigation Task Force and the Chancellor's Sustainability Advisory Committee. I know some of the leaders of those groups are here tonight, and it's great to be able to work together. We had a climate justice committee and many subcommittees that a lot of you all worked on, and a shout out to Madeline and Kevin and Bird and Christine and Sigrid and a lot of people who really made this happen. And now, as Kevin mentioned in the beginning, it's the UMass Amherst Environmental and Social Action Movement. So unions have lots of things we can do to influence the university around all of these issues. We can educate members about environmental and climate justice issues. We can organize and mobilize for change. We can build alliances with students and with community organizations, and we can negotiate contracts that include climate change issues. So I'll mostly talk about that. That's a legal right that unions have, and it's one of our sources of power. So just wanted to be clear that we're working on all of those things at once, and bargaining is only a piece of our work. The Carbon Mitigation Task Force was organized by the Chancellor, and in his charge to that committee, he said, be revolutionary. If you're not from UMass, you might not know that this is one of the university's slogans. And it was a really ambitious charge that he set out, with the goal of being 100% on renewable energy, so net zero carbon emissions by 2030. The largest sources of emissions on campus are buildings, electricity, and transportation. And so that task force has been working for a while. Their central recommendations are replacing steam heat with low temperature hot water, transitioning to renewable energy, revising building standards, so that includes renovations as well as new construction, increasing energy efficiency, and they have collected an unbelievable amount of data and research to show what needs to happen. The price tag is high. It's about $500 million to implement their whole plan. But over time, it would result in a lot of savings for the campus. So the question is how to come up with that initial investment. And we have some ideas. So that will be an ongoing project. The Carbon Mitigation Task Force did a series of webinars last fall, about a year ago. And one of the things that they concluded was that community support will be essential if any of this is going to happen. So that's part of why we're here, and that's where we see the unions playing an essential role, working with the wider community to really make sure that these things are put into place. So we have sort of divided our issues into two categories. One is subjects that are under labor law called mandatory subjects of bargaining, things that the administration has to talk to the unions about. And the second is bargaining for the common good, which David mentioned also, which are sort of broader subjects. So I'll just briefly talk about how our issues fit into those two categories. In terms of mandatory subjects of bargaining, we have the right in our contract and under labor law to safe and healthy working conditions. So anything that has to do with safety in our buildings has to be negotiated with the unions. So we have proposals on the table to repair sick buildings. That includes hazard abatement in places where there may be mold, inadequate ventilation. We've learned a lot about ventilation over the past year and a half. And we have many buildings on campus that need extensive work in that area. Retrofitting for energy efficiency and deferred maintenance. Anyone who works on this campus, I don't have to tell you what the needs are. Some of them are very small scale, like sealing leaks in buildings, which would pay for itself in within 5 years. And some of them are bigger, like upgrading the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in many of our buildings. We have the right to negotiate around comfortable and productive working spaces for staff and faculty. So that's near the top of our list. Second is around campus closure days. And because buildings are such one of the main sources of carbon emissions, as well as commuting, we know that fewer days of people being on campus would be great for the environment. So we have a proposal to close campus the week of Thanksgiving and from Christmas Eve to New Year's Day. And then we have proposals around flexible and remote work schedules for the same reason. We want to bring fewer commuters to campus on a daily basis. And this aligns really nicely. We worked on these proposals before COVID, but it does really align with the union's proposals to enable flexible work as much as possible and to have a long-term goal of a 4-day work week for everybody. Parking is the last category of mandatory subjects of bargaining, and we have a whole bunch of proposals related to parking. We want to make it easier for people to buy occasional parking permits so that if you mostly take the bus or bike or walk to campus, you would have a low-cost way of parking in a convenient lot on the occasions that you need to be on campus. We want to give priority to carpools and make sure that there are more spots available to carpoolers with lower fees for parking. And we want more charging stations for electric cars. I just heard from someone who said, I'm trying to drive my electric car as much as possible, and the charging stations are always full. So there's a need for more of those, as well as bike parking that is, covered and protected. So those are all mandatory subjects of bargaining. We have presented these issues at the bargaining table with the administration, and we're going to be following up, and we may need to do some organizing and bring people to bargaining and talk about how to make some of this happen going forward. In terms of the bigger issues that we're working on, these would fall under what we call bargaining for the common good, reducing carbon emissions. We share that goal with the Carbon Mitigation Task Force, as I mentioned, but I think there's a lot of concern about whether there will be enough urgency to make this happen by 2030. So that's where we're at. We want to make sure that any of the work that's created are good union jobs. So whether it's doing the deep energy retrofitting, deferred maintenance on campus, there's work surveying and evaluating our current spaces, administering programs, supporting climate justice curriculum, which we would like to expand the existing programs. And we want to make sure that all of this work is done with an eye toward promoting gender equity and racial justice in terms of doing the hiring and making sure that the work is equitable. We have social justice goals, including cutting ties with the Bank of America and other large polluters. Eversource was a new one that that we just learned about, but we can think about how to include that issue as well. We've talked a lot about minimizing waste on campus, and we have some good ideas about how to do that, and food justice also fits in that category. The unions have spent a lot of time advocating and lobbying for state funding to support this agenda. The American Rescue Plan Act, which provided stimulus money to the states, it provided a lot of money to the state of Massachusetts. There's about $5.8 billion that the legislature needs to decide how to allocate. And the MTA has put forward proposals. That's the Mass Teachers Association. That's the parent union of most of our campus unions. Excuse me. And many of us have been talking with legislators and doing that lobbying. We're still waiting to see the administration's plan. We haven't seen the document where they lay out the need. Other campuses, the community colleges and state universities have made requests of that pool of funds, and we're hoping to work with the administration to make sure that some of that money comes to UMass Amherst. The federal stimulus funds are really a perfect fit for what we're talking about tonight, because they're intended to support one-time costs, and we have so much work that could be done on campus to improve our buildings and our infrastructure. It would be a great use of one-time money and a real investment in the future. So we're working on that and would love to involve more people in that work. And then finally, joining labor and community coalitions and trying to build solidarity and power for future campaigns. So tonight is a good step in that direction. In terms of the long-term issues, sometimes we get the question, why are the unions working on this environmental justice stuff? And so these are some of the answers that our people have responded with. Obviously, climate change kills people every year, more and more every year, and working class communities and people of color are impacted the most. It's clear that the economic costs of climate change are growing, and the question is who will pay, who will benefit, and who will lose out. And it's incredibly important for unions and working class organizations to be involved in those discussions. We've seen what austerity looks like. Every time there's a crisis, the state and the university respond by tightening things up, whether it's furloughs and layoffs, cutting programs, cutting budgets. And the only way to change that is for us to be organized and make sure our demands are on the table. And finally, unions are the people who are going to do the work to make all of this change happen. So we should be at the forefront of deciding how our campus is organized, how decisions are made, and how the work gets done. So I'll end where I ended last time, which is to say change is coming for sure, no question about that. And we all need to be part of the process from the very beginning. Thank you.